Okay, so I think that we can kick off. And as always, thanks very much, everyone, for taking the time to come along and attend this session. And obviously, if you're watching the recording, thanks for taking the time to review it. So, what we're going to be looking at today is Turnitin, MTU's potential plagiarism detection system, I guess is a better way of putting it. So, in this session today, what I'm hoping to cover is to look at what Turnitin is, creating an assignment for Turnitin, how to access the report, the plagiarism report that Turnitin produces, how to interpret that, some things to be aware of in terms of how Turnitin stores user data, how to use it effectively, and if time allows, I'm hoping to talk briefly at the end just a little bit about Turnitin and Gen AI content and the interplay between those two. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to put them into the chat or into the Q&A, and I'll try my best to answer them as I go. If there's anything sensitive or anything that we need a bit more time to kind of work through, then I'll do it at the end of the session. So Turnitin, I'm sure as everyone is pretty aware, is a web-based plagiarism detection system. So all that really means is that anything which is submitted to Turnitin, it will check it against a very large database of journals, books, publications, reports, web pages, etc., etc., and also submissions from other students who submit to Turnitin to see if there is any unoriginal content appearing in students' work. And Turnitin is integrated into Canvas here in Cork and in Kerry, and is available for all MTU lecturers and also all students across all modules. So if Canvas is kind of the hub of all these different things, Turnitin is an element of the assessment kind of area there. One of the things to maybe just be aware of, and this will hopefully become a little bit clearer when we look at actually the Turnitin settings themselves, but maybe just something to be aware of initially is that there's a couple of different options available when it comes to submitting student work to Turnitin. So essentially, what you can determine is you can determine what Turnitin should do with the student submissions that are submitted to it. So this is essentially just an option within a Turnitin assignment, but I just want to spend a little time talking about it because it is important. So this three options for what Turnitin can do with student work is that it can store it to a standard paper repository. Now, what that means is that Turnitin will essentially, any submissions that your students give, Turnitin will hang on to those and it will use the submissions your student give. It will compare those, any future submissions against that. So essentially, Turnitin keeps your student submissions and a year down the line, 2 years down the line, however long down the line, they become part of the database that Turnitin will check future kind of student work against. Institution paper repository is very much kind of along the same lines. The main difference there is that um, basically Turnitin will store your student submissions, but it will only make those available to other MTU assignments. So the standard paper repository, you can kind of think about it like this kind of global database that Turnitin draws upon to check for unoriginal content. The institution paper repository is just the MTU database that Turnitin will use. So what that means is your student submissions, they don't go outside of MTU, so to speak. It means that Turnitin will hang on to your students' submissions and it will compare future submissions to Turnitin against your students' ones, but only for other MTU assignments, if that makes sense. So your student submissions don't go outside of MTU in any way, shape, or form. Where that can be useful, obviously, is if I have a student, let's say I'm looking after first years this year, and they submit, what I might do is I might select the institution paper repository because I don't want everyone using Turnitin to be able to, compare against my students' work. But I might want to hang on to them so that I can compare, for example, when I've a new group of first years next year. I want to be able to compare the current first year's work against the future first year's work next year and the year after and the year after. Do not store the submitted papers then is kind of essentially what it says in the tin. That means that Turnitin will not hang on to any submissions, any of your student submissions. So it will take your student submissions, it will compare them and try and identify plagiarism based on comparison against other databases, books, journals, articles, so on and so forth. But it's not going to hang on to your student submissions. There is no specific rule or recommendation that we have for any of the options there. It is very much up to yourself what you want to do or what option you want to select there. Um, and if in doubt, I think generally kind of a good step is to simply ask your students what they are comfortable with. Um, so yeah, there's no whatever you select, your students' submissions will be compared against that kind of global database, or Turnitin's kind of uh, full kind of database of journals, articles, whatever else. But so like whatever of those options you want to pick is entirely kind of up to yourself and maybe up to your students. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a Turnitin assignment. So the way we can do that is from within the Canvas environment, we go into our module, we go to our assignments area, and what we can do is we can very simply click on the option to create an assignment using the blue button here. So we are going to create an assignment. We're going to give it a name. So we'll say sample Turnitin 12th May. What we'll do then is we can insert a brief here. It's something that we've discussed in previous training sessions, but you can insert any number of elements here, including links, including documents, either uploading documents or picking documents from within the Canvas environment, so on and so forth. So this is a good place to kind of make it clear to your students what is expected of them. So we can leave the points, we can leave the assignment group, we can leave the display grade. Now, an important aspect, all right, just it's not a huge deal, but maybe just for your own edification, is that you'll see where we can select plagiarism, essentially Turnitin to appear is here under plagiarism review. Now that plagiarism review feature, that plagiarism review box, that will only show up if it is a file upload or a text entry. So for example, you can see if I don't select file upload, if I select website URL or media recording, that's not going to appear. So if that box, the plagiarism option isn't showing for you, you maybe just need to make sure that either text entry or what we generally recommend file upload is selected. So, excuse me, under plagiarism review then there's only the one option, which is Turnitin. And once that's selected, a number of different kind of options relating to the Turnitin assignment will appear here. So as we mentioned, the first option is what you want to do with student submissions to this particular assignment. So we can, as we said, either keep it in the global paper repository, we can keep it in the institution paper repository, the just MTU repository, or we cannot store students' submitted papers. There is an option then in terms of what we want to compare submissions against. So generally, periodicals, journals, and publications is what it says in the tin. It is Turnitin's vast database of books, journals, articles, so academic work, website content, which is essentially kind of anything out there on the web that Turnitin can lay its hands on. And then the other options is the institutional repository. So that is the MTU database that we kind of talked about before, and the student repository, which is Turnitin's, uh, like we said, it's kind of global database. Generally, what we would recommend is you tick all those boxes. I think all of them are ticked by default. It's just no harm to compare student work against as many kind of resources as you possibly can. There's a couple of additional options then in terms of the similarity report. So if you want to, you can decide if you want to exclude bibliographic material. So if a student has a bibliographic section, that can be excluded. You can exclude quoted materials, which means that if a student's put something into quotes, then Turnitin will identify, okay, well, that's probably not plagiarized. So I'm not going to count that towards the plagiarism detection score. And you can also exclude small sources, which is essentially you can decide if it's less than, we'll say, 5 words, even if Turnitin decides that it might be plagiarized. If it's under 5 words, then it's not going to count it as plagiarized material. And again, all of these very much to your own discretion, but all of these options, the bibliographic material, the quoted material, the small sources, you can change those from within the similarity report that gets generated anyway. So You don't need to worry too much about those. It can even be useful to kind of in the similarity report turn those on and off and see kind of how that changes things. So the main settings really is you decide yourself where you want to store submissions. You ideally make sure all of these are ticked. And then another really important aspect is when you're going to show the report to students. So the options here is you can show it immediately, which is the default option. You can show it after the assignment is graded, after the due date, or never. Now, essentially, there's four options available here, but really it's either, in practical terms, you either show the report to students immediately or else one of the other three. So it's kind of a binary choice. Now, why it's a binary choice is because, okay, we're going to set a deadline for this for, we'll say, the end of this week. Grant. So if I show the report to students immediately, from a student perspective, what that means is that they are going to submit, let's say we say they submit on the Friday. So that means they submit on the Friday. It's not due until the end of the week. If they're shown the report immediately, then what will happen from a student perspective is they'll submit. They'll be able to see the potential plagiarism report, and because they're able to see it immediately, let's say on Friday morning, that means that they then have time, if the plagiarism score is quite high, they have time to amend their submission to kind of try and bring that plagiarism score back down and then submit ahead of the deadline. So hopefully that makes sense. If you're showing the report to students immediately, essentially what you're doing is you are allowing them to submit, to see the plagiarism detection score. And then if they have time before the deadline, it's giving them, I suppose, the opportunity to try and bring that score down by amending their content. If I show the report to students after it's graded or after the due date or never, what I'm doing is I'm removing that option from them of being able to submit, see the plagiarism score, and amend it. If I decide that I'm going to show a report to students after the assignment is graded, from a student perspective, they are going to submit on, let's say, Friday morning. Because I've decided to show it to them after it's graded, they're not going to see the plagiarism score. So they're going to submit, they don't get any feedback whatsoever, and it's only after the due date and after I've graded the assignment that they're going to see the plagiarism detection score. So essentially the option is if you show the report to students immediately, depending on, how far ahead of the deadline they submit, they get the opportunity to see the plagiarism score they're getting and then take steps to reduce that. If it's any of the other options after it's graded, after the due date, or never at all, then they submit, but they don't get to see the plagiarism score. So how much of the content is showing as kind of plagiarized material until after everything is finished, until after the due date has passed, until after the work has been graded, or else they never get to see it at all. So the main difference there really is if you decide to show it to the report to students immediately, you are giving them the opportunity to submit, see what kind of plagiarism detection score is coming up, and amend before the final submission. If it's any of the other options, you're removing that option from them. If a student submits, if it's, let's say, if I select after the due date, and a student has content that is heavily plagiarized, it means they'll submit, but they won't be able to change anything. All that will happen then is after the due date, they'll be able to see the report which says, yeah, 75% of this is showing up as plagiarized material. Again, it's to your own decision entirely as to what option you'd like to pursue there personally, but look, this really is just my own personal preference. It's not a recommendation or anything. I tend to let the students see it immediately. Um, sometimes it can certainly happen that students, uh, plagiarize, without ill intent or kind of maybe don't fully understand the remit. So generally, I tend to allow the students to see the report immediately so that they can submit ahead of the deadline, see what kind of plagiarism score is coming up, and then it gives them that opportunity to go and revise their submission should they wish to do so. But again, that is very much up to your own decision making. If we're happy with all of this, we can save and publish, and then that will become available to students from a student perspective. All it really means is that when they are going to submit, they'll submit as they would any other assignment, click Start Assignment, add the file here, And the only kind of major difference from their perspective is that there's just a little box here that they have to tick, whereby they agree to Turnitin's end user license agreement. And kind of there's a statement that this submission is their own original work. So from your perspective, if we go to a different assignment, so I've set up my assignment, students have submitted to it. The way that I can view, and also that the student can view, the results of the plagiarism detection score is very simply, we as the lecturer go into the assignment, we go into speed grader, and then we can identify which students have submitted against the assignment with that through here and that little orange dot. And when we go in here, we'll see the original document file here. We'll see the resource that they've developed, or excuse me, the content of what they've submitted on the left-hand side. And then if Turnitin has been enabled for this assignment, what you'll see there is the similarity score. So this is showing up, as we can see, as 30% plagiarized material. To get a better look at that, very simply, we just click on that percentage score, and that then will open up the plagiarism detection report, or the similarity report, or the analysis report, whatever you want to call it, in a new window. So from within this space, then there's a number of different options available to us. So maybe a little bit like the speed grader, content is displayed on the left-hand side, and then there's a number of options over to the right-hand side that we can make use of. So there's a number of different ways of, I suppose, looking or determining what kind of content came from where, and where it can be uh, how to interpret it. So one way of looking at it is that, very simply, as you can see, there's different aspects of this area, or excuse me, of this paper, that are color coded. So we can very simply read through the document, and if we click on any of the highlighted areas, what that will do is it will show over on the left hand side, over on the left hand side here, you can see the kind of numbers, and then over on the right hand side, if we click on any of the highlighted areas, what it will do is it will show, on the right hand side, where this is actually drawn from. So for example, so one way of looking through, or kind of working our way through, the plagiarism detection report is to simply click through the student's work and identify over on the right hand side where exactly these potential, and I would emphasize potential plagiarism, kind of is arising. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, if we want to, we can go more so using the area on the right hand side, which, by the way, we can hide and we can show using the kind of the arrow drawer there. So another way of doing it is, if we scroll to the top of this area on the right hand side, we're given a full list of all the sources where potential content has been identified as potentially kind of coming from. So this is a useful way of just being able to see where the bulk, let's say the larger percentage of the potential plagiarism, is kind of coming from. So we can see here for this piece that 18% of it, which is a big amount, is coming from this specific source. And if we click into it, what we can do is we can click on if there is a link available, we can click on the link provided, and that will bring us to that URL where Turnitin thinks the content is from. If we want to, we can move through the different kind of instances of this using the arrows up here. And similarly, it's just a question of kind of working our way through the different sources, should we wish to do so. An alternative is, if we click on the top for this match group, what this will do is basically it will just indicate to us that 24 matches were found, and based on that, 10 of these indicate that they're not cited or quoted, 7 are missing quotations, 2 are missing citations, so on and so forth. And again, we can work our way down through this to click any of the areas on the right-hand side, and again, that will bring us to the relevance points of the work over on the left-hand side. We can, should we wish to, also click on the filters option here, And again, like we mentioned, this kind of can determine what we compare the submission against. And we also have our exclusion filter here. So again, these are the options in terms of if we want to exclude the bibliography, if we want to exclude quoted text, if we say, okay, anything under 7 words, forget about it. Excuse me, 8, I guess. Exclude cited text. And again, if we hit apply filters, what we can see is that because we've kind of made those changes in terms of excluding these kind of standard elements, Turnitin is essentially being a little bit less severe, and it's now indicating that only 11% of this content is potentially plagiarized. Another option which we can do, I'm just going to turn those back on. So now we're back up to 30. Another option which we can do is if we want to, we can click into this and we can identify this is actually from a conference presentation where sorry, from this is from a conference, and the abstract for this was submitted against the conference. So we know for a fact that this is not actually plagiarized material, it's just the same content kind of being hosted elsewhere. So if we are satisfied that this source, which is constituting 18%, is actually definitely not plagiarized. What we can do is we can click on this exclude source icon. And what that will do is it will remove that source, or it will kind of discount that particular source. And we can see there that we've gone from 30% now down to 19%. So if we identify that there is something on the right-hand side here and we're confident that that is not actually plagiarized material, we can exclude that source. And as you can see, that has the result of dropping down the plagiarism score significantly. If we decide that we want to turn those sources back on, what we can do is we can simply, in the sources kind of tab, click on the exclusions that are available here. And if we want to, we can turn these back on one by one, or we can hit include all sources, and that will bring all of those back. And again, the plagiarism detection score lines up that way. There is also the option here for flags. If we want to, essentially, this really is kind of more of a nod towards Gen AI content, so content that will be generated using ChatGPT and Claude and similar. And also as well, this tries to determine if there is, for example, hidden text or suspicious characters. So essentially what this does, or kind of a way of trying to get around tools like Turnitin very often is to kind of try and, mess up the system by using an alternative form of A, maybe from a different alphabet or a different kind of character, and kind of slipping that in. So it looks from a visual perspective like kind of English, but it's actually using different kind of libraries of characters, and that kind of was a way, but is less so nowadays, of kind of getting around tools like Turnitin. We can also, if we wish, we can download this analysis report should we wish to, using the download button here. We can also click on details here if we want to, and it just gives us a little bit of additional information. If you decide that you want to turn it into delete a submission to it, you can do so by contacting Turnitin support. And what they might look for is they might look for the submission ID. So you can get this from here should you wish to. So just one or two things in terms of that essentially is a bit of a whistle stop tour of Turnitin. But yeah, generally the process is a question of creating a Turnitin assignment, of going into SpeedGrader to be able to identify the scores, and then clicking here to see the analysis report and being able to essentially just kind of use the filters to try and determine that. I would say in general, and as you can probably see from this score, Turnitin tends to err on the side of punitiveness. So more often than not, unless there is a very, very, very clear, uh, you know, indisputable case of plagiarized material, you might find that the percentage score for a Turnitin submission might be quite high. That really does not indicate actual plagiarism on the part of the student. More often than not, the scores tend to be a bit high and don't really reflect, instances of genuine plagiarism. So we would say as well, it's very important to take a look at the student's work and not to simply go off the percentage score, because more often than not, they can be quite misleading and can very often just be a question of Turnitin, as we identified here, just kind of counting quoted text or cited text. Maybe the student, in fairness, hasn't exactly quoted or cited stuff correctly, but by excluding that a little bit, you can see the percentage score drops down quite a bit. If you do think that there has been a definite instance of plagiarism or a very likely instance of plagiarism, what is recommended is that you contact your head of department or your module coordinator based on a suspected case of academic misconduct. And there is also the new academic, excuse me, academic integrity policy, which is available at the URL there. If people are interested, just let me know in the chat or in the Q&A, and I can include a link to this in the recording of this session that we send out afterwards. And yeah, there's a range of information there which also clearly indicates what to do in a suspected case of plagiarism. Something which is maybe just worth pausing on briefly is, let's say particularly for kind of postgrads or anything like that, it might be the case that you want a student to submit a draft of their work, let's say of their thesis, to turn it in to be able to see how much of it is shown as plagiarized and then to amend it later. So in that kind of instance, the difficulty here really is very simply just that what you don't want to happen is you don't want a student to submit their thesis and you store it in the standard paper repository or institution paper repository, um, because what's going to happen from a student perspective there is they're going to submit against this particular their draft against this particular assignment. Turnitin is going to store it in its kind of paper in its repository, and then when the student goes to submit their final work, like let's say a month later, what will happen is that final piece will be showing up as like 90 to 100% plagiarized, because Turnitin already has a very similar document, the draft that they've submitted, in its repository. So in that instance, what you want to do, what is probably safest to do, to be honest, is create two assignments, a draft and a final submission. So if you're getting students to submit a draft of their work and you want them to be, because you want them to be able to like run it through Turnitin, get a plagiarism detection score, but you don't want Turnitin to kind of to hang on to that. What you do is you select the option to not store the submitted paper and you set the report to show to students immediately. So let's say what I might do is I might set this as a draft for my students, and I just make sure that Turnitin is not storing the submitted papers and the report is shown to students immediately. And because of this, when they submit, Turnitin is not going to keep their submitted paper. So it's not going to compare their final version against its draft version they're submitting. And it's going to show the report to students immediately because that's what we want for the draft. We want them to be able to see the what percentage of it is showing up as plagiarized. For the final submission, then you can essentially do what you want. It's recommended obviously that you compare submissions against all these sources. If you want to, you can, for the final one, you can store the submission in the standard paper, or you can leave it as do not store the submitted paper. So just a final mention, I think, on kind of Turnitin and content coming from Gen AI tools such as ChatGPT or Claude or anything like that. So all of the research indicates that certainly at the moment there are no clear guarantees that any plagiarism detection tool, so no tool like Turnitin, will definitely capture instances of Gen AI content with 100% certainty or with 100% confidence. And yeah, so look, there is a range of research going back quite a few years now, and all of that indicates that there is essentially tools like Turnitin cannot be realistically relied upon to catch content developed by tools like ChatGPT. There's a number of different reasons for this. Essentially, tools like Turnitin have access, as we've identified, to a large database of academic journals, books, so on and so forth, to compare student submissions against. One of the major issues with students using tools like ChatGPT is Turnitin has no access to what ChatGPT produces. It can't see, there is no database from like ChatGPT which says here is all of the content ChatGPT has produced. So Turnitin can't compare against tools like that. So the other elements is that there is like advanced prompt engineering. So every time you put something into ChatGPT, every time you ask ChatGPT or Claude for a response, the answer you get is always going to be a little bit different. So because it's that little bit different, it makes it very difficult for tools like Turnitin to catch it. Students can repeatedly ask for different versions. So like I might put something into ChatGPT, it produces content for me, and I might say, okay, make that a little less formal or a little more formal. I can also, as a student, very simply, and kind of this is absolutely within people's power to do, is I can get content out of ChatGPT, and then I can very simply go, okay, well, I'm going to rewrite this line here. I'm going to move this here. I'm going to put this paragraph up here instead of down here. And hey, presto, it's undetectable, or certainly there is no way of proving that kind of I have amended the ChatGPT content, and there's no way for tools like Turnitin to pick that up. There is also a whole range of products and services now which essentially will humanize content coming out of tools like ChatGPT or Claude. So, and an another important consideration in trying to rely on tools like Turnitin to catch content developed by ChatGPT or by Claude or so on and so forth is the notion of false positives, whereby a student might submit, their own original work, but through, I don't know, a healthy paranoia, let's say, or through tools like, AI detection kind of versions of Turnitin, might identify a student's original kind of genuine work as AI developed, and yeah, fail them, which is obviously very, very difficult situation for everyone, but for the student in particular. So it is strongly recommended not to rely on tools like Turnitin for trying to catch Gen AI developed content. What are far more reliable methods of trying to address this is setting very clear AI assessment parameters for your assessment. So just trying to communicate to students, excuse me, you know, you are allowed to use ChatGPT or Claude or these kind of tools for idea generation, or you're allowed to use these tools for giving you feedback, even though I wouldn't kind of agree with that myself. But, you know, just communicating to students what they are and are not allowed to use AI tools for. So, for example, yeah, you might determine that students can use these tools for idea generation or for maybe giving them a bit of feedback on their writing, or for helping them to better understand or how to phrase certain elements of their work. But students are not allowed to use it for the development of actual assessment content, if that makes sense. Another thing which can be good is to highlight the presence of Turnitin as opposed to relying on it. So it's a little bit of a bluff, but you can also say to students, for example, um, you're not allowed to use Gen AI tools for this particular assessment, and I will be running all of your work through Turnitin. So Turnitin, even though it's not particularly reliable, can maybe be useful as a deterrent. Excuse me. Um, Other aspects then maybe more relate to elements of assessment redesign. So instead of focusing entirely or focusing on marks or all kind of feedback on the final output that students produce, maybe trying to focus a little bit more on marking the process of assessment as opposed to the kind of final output. Also, we're all aware that there are things that Gen AI tools do well, but there's things that they do very badly, such as creativity, personal reflection, working with real world data, anything that kind of is more like authentic assessment. Gen AI tools become less and less useful to students. And generally, just talking to students, just kind of talking to your students, try and identify with them, I suppose, and I found it can be a useful exercise myself, just trying to determine as well, okay, in this industry, which I am trying to prepare you all for, what does AI tools do well? What do they do badly? Where is the value that you are bringing to a particular business or to a particular organization? On that topic, there is a resource available. Again, I can send this URL out in the follow-up email should people wish, for a Canvas module, which focuses on the responsible use of AI in MTU and also on AI assessment scale briefs. So what these are is essentially these are just sample briefs for I think it's essays or for student presentations or for literature reviews, and they are these sample briefs. There's different levels of them based on this framework called the AI assessment scale. So essentially, the way to think about it is level one on the AI assessment scale says you can't use AI tools for anything at all. Level three says, okay, for this particular essay, you can use them for idea generation or you can use them for a bit of feedback. Level five is you can use AI in whatever way, shape, or form you wish, including getting it to write content for you. So those are useful just if you are thinking about trying to amend your assessments to better incorporate or even just to better, I think there's a lot to be said for just trying to communicate more clearly to students what is and is not permissible in terms of their use of AI for a particular assessment. These might be useful resources for you. And as I said, I can include the URL to this space where you can access these after this session. In terms of additional supports, then there is a Turnitin Help Center at helpcenter.turnitin.com. So you can, through that, submit a request and Turnitin have support agents who will be able to help you with that. We also have a number of help articles in our knowledge base. Um, Again, if in any doubt, you can very simply go to tel.cit.ie, and from there, there is an option for staff resources, and you can access the help docs, our YouTube channel, so on and so forth. And so that's it. I appreciate that was a real whistle stop tour, but I was keen to keep it to try and keep it to under 40 minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be very happy to hear those. You can put them into the webinar chat or into the Q&A section. Equally, if you don't have any comments and you're fine with just what was presented, maybe just give me a no or a thumbs up or something in the chat or the Q&A to just let me know that you're okay and that you don't need any additional information. But otherwise, as I said, any questions, any queries, any comments, any concerns, please do fire those into the chat or the Q&A. So I'll just shut up for a minute to let people do just that. So there is a good question there. Is it possible to retroactively set Turnitin where assignments are already submitted? Um, it's possible to do so, but it's a little bit of a workaround. So what in that instance, what one might wish to do is if we go back into our assignments, if we have, let's say, a standard assignment, let's say this one, and people have already submitted to it, what you would have to do essentially is click into this assignment, download the student submissions. Now, oh, sorry, you could do this yourself, or you could get the students to do it as well. But let's say if it's the summertime and everyone is gone, if you wanted to do it yourself, go into the assignment, download all of their submissions, which will give me a zip file with all their work, go back into assignments, create a Turnitin assignment for the students. And then if I go into the grades area, what I can do is I can identify the let's say the Turnitin assignment that I've just created, and if I click here, click on the arrow, I can submit for students. So then I just grab their work, I upload it one by one into that space, and yeah, that's one way of doing it. Obviously, if the students are still around, I could simply say, okay, everyone, uh, I've created a new Turnitin assignment. I know you already submitted to this, but please submit to this one instead. An additional option, I'm slightly wary of it myself, but it can work, is if I go into my normal assignment, what I can do, as we can see, plagiarism review set to none, I can send that to Turnitin. I can have it, yeah, so yeah, that kind of throws up that error. So the reason that error is coming up, sorry, is because I've already kind of set particular parameters around this. So if I go back, set the none and try again. Yeah, it is doable to kind of go into an assignment and to change it, turn it in after the fact. But yeah, as I said, it kind of requires a lot of messing around, I find, with assigning access and the due dates and so on and so forth. So as I said, my own experience is it's pretty much easier to create a new turn in assignment and then get students to submit what they submitted to the regular assignment to that one or to do it yourself. So hopefully that answers that question. And Maria has a question also. Is there a percentage similarity score that is generally accepted for students to work within, e.g., less than 10%? It's a good question, Maria. We don't really have one because for the simple reason that it really can vary depending on the type of assessment. My own, I mean, like we saw there in terms of the plagiarism score that I identified there. Now, and again, this is probably to the point. I mean, this is a little this is kind of a bit specific or whatever because the reason it's showing so high is this was submitted to a particular conference and that conference is kind of where the bulk of the plagiarism detection is coming from. Um, so yeah, so it there isn't plagiarism happening here. It's genuinely innocent. So uh, what I would say is anything around, let's say anything kind of above 30%, I would be wary of. But again, and I really would like to emphasize this, Turnitin tends to be very punitive. It's Turnitin's job to catch as much plagiarism as possible. So it tends to overcompensate in that regard. Generally, this actually happens very, very infrequently, but what can be useful is if you have a particular assignment and you have a genuine indicator, like a genuine case of a student's work that is plagiarized very heavily, that's your kind of metric. Stuff like this, I mean, like generally, if I saw, I would say kind of 30% or above, I would be wary. But as I said, it becomes it's very clear very quickly that that 30%, 18% of it is coming from this, and this isn't a genuine source. So I would say kind of anything less than 30% is, I would count it as not a huge concern. But again, maybe a better way of looking at it, Maria, apologies, maybe a slightly better way of looking at it is if this was like 32% and there was only one source here, like if someone had grabbed an entire, let's say, page of content, let's say all of this content showed up as plagiarized, that's kind of a bigger deal, if that makes sense, because that's someone clearly taking a lot of content and throwing it into their own submission, as opposed to what is more often the case, where you might get like, I don't know, 20 to 30%, but it's all tiny little bits, and more often than not, it's just uh in my experience, it's just kind of content, yeah, being similar, but not being plagiarized, maybe not being quoted or cited correctly, descriptions of kind of what a source is saying as opposed to like genuinely trying to plagiarize it. I mean, you can even see here that there is kind of content which is being counted as plagiarized material, 2%, but it's within quotes, so the student isn't actually trying to cod anyone. So yeah, very much to your own discretion, but I think yeah, if you do come across and I hope you don't, but if you do come across a genuine instance of clear plagiarism, maybe it's worth making note of the score that's showing up because yeah, every assignment is different, every subject area is different, so on and so forth. Okay, well, other than that, all that's left to say is thanks very much, everyone, for coming along to the session. I hope that was of some help. Obviously, come the start of next semester, we'll be doing more training, and so there'll be more on this. But otherwise, yeah, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I hope everyone has a great summer and look forward to seeing you again next semester. So, thanks very much, everyone, and take care.